Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners, you're on Big Little Small Talk with Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and we're in beautiful Nobby today and I'm interviewing a lady called Louise Noble who is the founder of the Mulberry Project. Louise, welcome along to Big Little Small Talk. Thanks for making time for me and thank you for a beautiful morning tea with beautiful smelling roses and matching cutlery and a silver milk jug. And how long have you been here in Nobby?
Hi Megan, it's lovely I'm really pleased that you came all the way out to Nobby today. Well, actually, we're kind of neighbours because you're at Greenmount, just up the road.
Indeed.
So, yeah, I've been living in Nobby for 13 years this year. So,
And Nobby is where the project started. Tell me about the Mulberry Project.
So, the Mulberry Project started as a conversation underneath my mulberry tree in 2016. So, 2016, we had some lovely winter rain and I had just had a bumper crop. I had so many mulberries, just didn't know what to do with them, and to the point where the branches were nearly breaking. And so I was inviting anyone and everyone that I knew to come and pick mulberries at my house. And then one day, a friend of a friend of a friend, a Congolese fellow who'd recently arrived in Toowoomba, was there picking mulberries. And he said to me, Louise, yeah, it's great picking mulberries here, but you've got all this land and you're not growing anything. We really miss our vegetables. Could we come and grow some vegetables at your house? And so I said, yeah, okay, why not?
And when he said all this land, what are we talking? We're talking acres? Are we talking square meterage?
No, I mean, my block's relatively small. I've got like 3/4 of an acre, so it's not a massive property or anything, but we just dug up 500 square metres on my block. So went and had a chat to one of the local farmers, Andrew Mance, and he came down with his tractor and, hey presto, 15 minutes later.
Tilled.
It was like we tried to do it, with like a little rotary hoe, and it was like, yeah, very time consuming. It was funny seeing how quickly you can do it with the real machine.
Right, a little bit of machinery. So you're on beautiful black soil here.
Yes.
And so what happened then? Who were you going to let grow stuff on your block of land?
So mainly it was pretty much the idea that it was open to anyone who missed their vegetables, like anyone from the migrant communities. So we started with quite a few people from the Congolese community, and that was always the first conversation, like, what do you miss? And so for a lot of the Congolese community, they were going amaranth, which is like amaranth, and I was like going, what is this? They'd only heard of amaranth for seed, not leaf amaranth. So but then sort of some other community members from the South Sudanese community became involved. And so, again, it was like they all had a special vegetable that they couldn't find here, and that they really missed, that's really important to their foods from their home country. So for a group of people, we just started growing all sorts of things that I'd never heard of.
And how did you know that the conditions you were going to be able to grow them? Or can you grow anything, really?
Oh, well, when you're coming into... So, mulberries are sort of September, October. So that's kind of spring. Pretty much in the summer growing season, you can grow most things. Most summer vegetables anyway, particularly from those sort of warmer climates. In the black soil, there's tricks to working with black soil. It's not just as simple as like throwing a seed in the ground. There's quite a lot of preparation that goes with growing things. Some things were a bit of a work in progress. We planted cassava, which is very popular with a lot of migrant communities, not just the African communities, but a lot of Asian and Latin American countries as well are big cassava lovers. But
is cassava a bit like sweet potato? No.
I suppose it has a tuber that it's more sort of like hard and starchy. It's a different sort of texture to a sweet potato. It does quite well and it's pretty drought hardy and things like that, but it doesn't like the frost too much. So, it kind of, after a couple of years with some really hard frosts in, winter, that kind of knocked a lot of it about. So it is easier to grow when you're not so frost prone as we are out here.
Mm-hmm. And where did you get the seed for all of these things how did you...
How did we source? Sourcing the seed was, that was an interesting one. So we were looking at a lot of... so some of the organic seed producers, it's like Eden Seeds and other... they grow that are growing like a lot of tropical or different vegetables. They were available sort of like online in Australia. So, but the biggest challenge there was actually knowing what the vegetable was called in English. So sometimes we knew what the vegetable was in that country. So say, for example, for the South Sudanese community, the plant that they really miss is Molokhia. And anyway, it took a long time to kind of work out, Molokhia in Australia, the common name is Egyptian spinach. And so the seed was available, but we just didn't know what the name was. I mean, it's not a readily available seed, but we could find it. So, yeah.
Wow, how amazing. So tell me where people came from. You already said the South Sudanese and the Congo. So what other groups did you have?
So I suppose it was the African communities. There was, Burundians and Rwandans as well. And then soon it was sort of joined by people from the Sri Lankan community, some Syrians and Iraqis, people from the Kurdish Comanche people. I'm just trying to think. We had, lots of different communities like that.
And on any given day, how many people would you have here on your little 3/4 acre block?
Well, I suppose it was like, if you include the kids, like it might be 15 or 20, because like a lot of people have got large families. So, that was really quite fun, working in that way. But I suppose sort of with the Mulberry Project, it started as this community gardening, but the larger conversation was employment. So all of those recently arrived communities, they were going, the greatest worry was employment. And so we were thinking about, like, one was the connecting with the traditional plant foods, and the second one was how you could use an existing skill set and then gain employment, using those skills or redeploying those skills in a different way. So, the Mulberry Project has sort of grown over time, because it's had that dual focus: one, reconnection, and two, employment. The other thing that happened as well was Nobby's sort of nearly 40 kilometres from Toowoomba, so it was logistically challenging to run a program when, particularly for people who have recently arrived, they don't have transport and fuel costs and all the rest of it like that. So then the search was on to find somewhere in Toowoomba where we could really develop and expand the program.
Well, I want to talk to you about because it is a social enterprise. It's obviously not just about growing the product, but what you did with that and the, as you said, the employment. But just before we go away from Nobby, what did you do about water? How did you have enough water? What did you do? Were you paying for all the water for this?
So I mean, it's a little bit sort of that was a big learning, because I'd never grown at that scale before. And so I've got about 30,000 litres of water storage, but once you're actually growing plants, in a summer season, and we had some very hot summers as well, that water doesn't go far. And so, we were using town water. That's a big challenge. And that sort of led to looking at other ways that we could irrigate using much less water. And we've done like a little trial out here doing, I don't know if you're familiar with a wicking bed, what a wicking bed does, but it's basically watering the plants from underneath rather than the top. And so we've actually got like 2 trial beds that we built out here, where we basically built a trench, and that's, it's got a liner in it and geotextile fabric and filled with sand, and then geotextile and the soil mounted on top, and that's to have the watering from underneath. And when we did that trial, we had 50% less water consumption than drip irrigation, which was really substantial in terms of an outcome. So I think that it's a very good question, the one about water, and that's also been a challenge in terms of finding a permanent site for the Mulberry Project. Is you have to have the right conditions, you have to have accessibility for the people you're working with, and access to water is critical. You can't do anything without water.
Number one, and I think you would have been starting all of that right in the middle of that terrible drought that we endured.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so it's getting too big for your 3/4 acre block in Nobby, and it's too far away. So what did you do then?
Then we had a conversation with Mercy Community up on South Street. So we started doing some gardening from Mercy, and so we were there for about 18 months before we moved out to our home now, which is at the Toowoomba Showgrounds.
Okay, and did you approach the showgrounds, or how did that collaboration work?
Well, the showgrounds, that actually came about as a conversation with yourself and Joe Ramier, who made the introduction to the Damon Phillips, who's the CEO of the Toowoomba Showgrounds. And so we've had a really great collaboration with the showgrounds sort of since that time. Originally, Damon had contacted me about being involved in... Spud, he's snoring.
Your dog is snoring. That's a bit of background noise.
Participating in the Toowoomba Show for was that the 2018 or 2019 Commonwealth Games?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Anyway, so they had kind of like an international feel for the international theme for the show that year, and so Damon gave us 6 tubs, like they're like sort of 1.2 metres by 1.2 metres, sort of poly tubs, like made out like water tank material basically, to build gardens in, and then have 6 different gardens representing our communities at the Toowoomba Show. And so, that was our first collaboration with the Show Society at that point.
Okay.
And that led to, now where we actually have a permanent site at the showgrounds.
So tell me about the site. Have you got a place that's obviously you need the soil and the area to grow stuff in, and have you got who is the Mulberry Project? There's you, and are you, how does it run? It's a not-for-profit.
It's a not-for-profit. So there's a number of different components to the Mulberry Project. There's the volunteer operations, which are open to anyone pretty much, and then we run training and employment programs in collaboration with GrowCom, which is the industry body for horticulture, and then those programs are funded, sort of employment pathway programs, principally through the Queensland government. So, and where we've been, project managing those initiatives in collaboration with GrowCom. So it's been that again has been a great collaboration because we have that direct link into industry, and so one, understanding the barriers that our communities face, and 2, understanding the sort of issues that the employers face and how we can prepare people for work so that they can have a sustainable, ongoing sort of employment outcomes.
So you're primarily dealing with refugees and migrants, not so much any other groups, is that?
It's not exclusively. We've got our volunteers, we've got Australian volunteers, we've got volunteers from, other communities. We've had involvement from the Indigenous community as well, local Indigenous community as well. So it's like we're not just, even though we're refugee and migrant, we don't want to create a ghetto. And I think the idea, also the other thing is that at one point there's never, one single ethnic group, which has actually been really good, because another barrier that everyone is keen to overcome is actually English language. And so by having, Aussies as well as people from various migrant communities, the common language in that environment, well, one is plants. Everyone has got plants and a love of plants. But 2, we're principally communicating in English, and so that's really great for building capacity in our group.
So people are coming along there, and then are they doing certificates in horticulture? Is that the sort of thing?
We have, COVID kind of knocked everything around with regards to funding for a lot of training programs, but we have delivered a Cert 2 horticulture. and currently we're delivering a program in collaboration with GrowCom called the Diverse Queensland Workforce Project. And so that has a slightly different focus because the focus is on skilled migrants and skilled migrant employment into agriculture. So we're working with people who have vocational skills. So there might be people who are truck drivers or have had experience driving a tractor or, other things like that, through to people who have, agronomists, ag engineers and people with PhDs in renewable energy. So it's a very broad group of people, and the program is really designed to identify what their gaps are into what's holding them back from gaining employment, and to assist them and then connect them to employers who are looking for people with those types of skills.
It is so I'm still picturing when you first went out there and you had these poly tubs.
Yeah.
What have you got now? What is the and what are you sort of? You're all got this love of plants. Are you still growing and producing stuff?
Yeah, we are. So a lot of the gardens that we have out at the Toowoomba showgrounds are actually related to. Well, we use them year round, but they're used for display during the Toowoomba shows. So from 6 poly tubs, we now have 26 poly tubs and another 6 that are timber. So we have all the garden beds. We deliver all the garden beds for Costa Georgiadis for his garden program at the Toowoomba show. And we do also all of the gardens for the children's education programs at the Toowoomba show. And then we've got various sort of in-ground garden beds around the place where, some of our community members are just growing the things that they like to eat, more or less. That's kind of like, it's limited in terms of scope and in terms of production, what we're actually doing at the moment. But the Show Society have given us use of a 1.5 hectare piece of land out at the showgrounds, where we're currently seeking funding to develop both a commercial nursery operations and cropping operations. So once we get the funding for that and we can actually have that, we'll be producing at scale where we can actually, not just have our volunteer operations, but actually have a social enterprise producing for sale that is supporting our training and employment programs.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, it's so complicated. So I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40DB 102.7 FM, and we're in our segment called Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Louise Noble, who, would you say that you're the CEO of the Mulberry
Managing
Project?
Director.
Managing Director. We all like a title, don't we? And I like that, yep. And Louise is just taking us through some of the history that started here in Nobby and where we are now, having a lovely cup of tea at her place, and how it's grown into this huge project, Mulberry Project. So, Louise, you were talking before, and I think I've spoken to you one other time about you were trying to, at one stage, get a commercial kitchen. Has that happened? Or
well, we don't yet, but it's kind of like I'm glad that like the Mulberry Project, like it's got the mulberry in the name because that's the story of the project. It's also the symbol of the project. What we're trying to achieve. Mulberries in certain environments are actually quite a weedy species. That are. And so that kind of, it's a funny way of thinking about our collaboration with the Show Society. So we started off with 6 little tubs. Now we've got like 30 gardens plus a whole lot of in-ground gardens. There's some other land that we're going to be developing. We're also going to be colonising the former Wynn News building. Will be our training, our training facility. So we'll have like training room and garden there. And then we've got our eyes on a couple of under-utilised kitchen facilities at the showgrounds where, the way that we sort of see it is like once we're producing at scale, you've always got excess of, produce at different times, which can then, be the vehicle for, food preparation and, hospitality sort of services. So, yeah, we don't actually have our own kitchen, but we have
If you're out there listening and you've got a kitchen... Is that where we're going?
Oh, no. It's like it's the ones at the showgrounds that we've got our eyes on. So it's kind of like, sorry, Damon. It was just sort of like...
You said about, I had in my mind that early on when you were producing things, you were selling it at the market. Is that true? Or
we participated in things like Felton Food Festival and Hampton Food Festival and things like that. So the issue was always that we had 500 square metres under cultivation, which we produced over a tonne of vegetables in a season. But it's not really, you're not really producing consistently at a commercial scale to be, you kind of can, but for it to be sort of viable, you need to be, producing in excess of that. And so most of the produce that we have, we've produced like here and elsewhere, has been sort of shared between the participants, and shared between their friends and family. So sometimes, we've had massive harvests and then it's kind of gone, to all the different families. In terms of the business model of the Mulberry Project, once we've actually got sufficient land under cultivation where we can produce at scale, the goal then will be to sell. But at present, even though we have sold it like at different events and stuff like that, principally we're producing for the people who participated in growing it. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that it's not really the product, it's what the skills that you're getting and the language skills and the sort of orientating yourself in your life skills, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying, like, a lot of it is about that, building skills and competency, and for a lot of people it's that they lose a lot of confidence when they move to a new country. They can't communicate effectively, all those things. So rebuilding confidence and actually thinking about how you can redeploy skills that you may have had previously in a new environment. It's just kind of like that reframing. So yeah, a lot of what we do is bridging. So it's really for people who are, have really high barriers, like going into being able to gain entry-level positions, because we have a lot of people who are illiterate in their own language, and so it's quite challenging. It's very difficult for people who have no literacy in Australian workplaces. So trying to get people to the point where they can transition confidently into and maintain employment is a really big journey for a lot of people. And at a different scale, the Diverse Queensland Workforce Project that we're doing at the moment with the skilled migrants, that's also another form of bridging where people they're highly skilled, often specialised skills, but lack experience in Australia. They may not feel confident advocating for themselves in English, and so gaining work in a professional role is often very difficult for them. So it's that bridging, how we can, everyone wants to contribute, or most people want to contribute at the end of the day, and it's like, how's the best way that we can get you from feeling outside to being part of a wider community? Yeah.
How do people get referred to the Mulberry Project?
So it's kind of self-referral, really, and we get a lot of internal referrals. So often people who've been involved in our programs over different times. So it's a little bit like, one of those elevator things with the trolleys, shopping trolleys. So people come in and then we work together, and then they move off, and they're employed and they're out in their life, which is great. So we're constantly, either those people who've been successful, they might refer one of their friends, or it might be their kids who are now sort of leaving school and they're worried about how their kids going to get into employment. So we work, a lot of the referrals happen in a fairly organic way.
Okay. And what about people who might have a love of or want to contribute in some way, or might want to help you? Do you need people like that as well?
Definitely.
Like people who volunteers?
Yeah, definitely.
You do.
And we have like a fantastic group of volunteers who help in all sorts of ways. So we were very lucky this year. to have the wonderful Ricky Adams, who was formerly at Darling Heights State School, as she was previously the parent engagement coordinator there. We've employed Ricky to take on that role as engagement coordinator. And so, yeah, Ricky's got fantastic networks. We've got people who are former Men's Shed volunteers who've now joined us, and we're very delighted to have those men who've got those wonderful skills. And, we've got, one lady who's helping with some of our admin work. We've got, all sorts of people. Our board members are very active, like in helping write some of our grant applications and things like that. So, yeah, we absolutely love anyone who's interested in participating to sort of get in touch. Yeah,
it's just such a fantastic story to have gone from a little block of land to this huge sort of, well, to me it sounds like a huge logistical organisation. So I would imagine that you've got all of these different nationalities. Is there ever any unrest, or any more so than there would be in a normal workplace, do you think?
I think what joins everyone is plants and food, and you can't go wrong with plants and food. So it's like plants is what you're going to cook to have food. So I think it's just a really good leveler when you've actually what happens. What's really delightful when people are participating, new participants, and when people are talking to each other about the stuff that they grow, and it's like, how do you cook this? And it's like people sometimes have the same vegetable, but they cook it differently, and so that's really fascinating. And I think that anyone who likes plants and food, it's like
step one.
Yeah, although it is funny, like with regards to all the communities, they actually have plants that are very particular to them. And the thing that was a real eye-opener to me was chilies, because I kind of thought, chilies are chilies, chilies are chilies. I know and when we were first planning what we were going to plant, I had like a catalogue of chili seed, like a full catalogue. I don't know how many varieties of chilies there were. And I was there with these different communities. I'm going, now how about this one? No, not that, not that, not that, not that, not that. Oh, okay, that one. And then there'd be another community and they'd go, oh no, I don't like that one. That's terrible. They go this, and they go, oh no, this. And so it's really funny. Just like, that's just an example of just like one plant, yet it's so culturally specific. And I had no idea, how different these chilies were. To me, they're just like, I kind of do like chili, but it's just like very hot, Whereas everybody's like going, oh no, it's like wine connoisseurs. It's like chili connoisseurs. So all the communities actually have different chilies. So that was like, that's the only dispute. Yeah. It's like, there's like, I'd never eat that, so.
Right. I did read a quote from you where you said, food is universal. You can't be at war with someone when you share food, which I thought was a lovely quote. Because you had, as part of the show this year, you had a big lunch. Tell me about that.
Yes, yeah. So, last year was the first year that we actually had the long lunch, and we had it again this year, which is sort of a really great collaboration between the Show Society and some of the sponsors who participate in the different programs that actually happen in the show. So the idea of the lunch was bringing together the young gardeners involved in the Buddies Garden program that is sponsored by Polman's Nursery. So Polman's Nursery donates seedlings to all the schools for their gardening in schools programs. So there were young gardeners, and then people from the agriculture sector, like growers, involved in that lunch as well. And the Mulberry Project, we had the Noble who did the meat, and then we had one of our lovely Azidi families cooking their absolutely delicious flatbreads with meat, and then we had our Afghan community members making 2 different types of amazing salad, plus a little sweet, all beautifully presented. So it was like a really great collaboration. We had corn as well. We had one of the South Sudanese families cooking corn on the brazier. So yeah, that was a really fun event.
So that was a ticketed event, and people can buy tickets for for next year, or
we're not sure exactly what form it'll take next year, but that was because it was basically sponsored by Heritage Bank. So it was like a free event, but it was invitation only, sort of for that event, but it was actually free for people to attend. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it sounds wonderful. Now, you mentioned that you have been in Nobby for 16 years.
13.
Is that right? 13 years, yeah. So did you come from an entrepreneurial family or a social justice type family? Or tell me about where you grew up.
So, funnily enough, I never thought I'd end up here. Like, it's kind of... but I did... I grew up in Toowoomba. Like, I went to school in Toowoomba.
What sort of work were your mum and dad doing?
So my dad, he was an ophthalmologist. And yes, and my mum was a specialist physiotherapist, so she was sort of women's health sort of physio. And so dad,
brothers and sisters.
Two brothers. Yeah.
Older or younger?
I'm in the middle.
Middle child. Okay.
A good negotiator.
Yeah. So had they? What I'm trying to, I want to get to how we got from growing up in Toowoomba, because I know you lived in France for a long time. So you left school. What happened then?
So I went to University of Queensland. I studied architecture, and because architecture's split. The degree is sort of, you do the first 3 years and then you do pretty much another 3 years for architecture. So I did the first 3 years at UQ and then had this crazy idea to go and study in Paris. So, I followed through and then spent 13 years in Paris, actually. So I finished my architecture degree, did my postgrad and worked as an architect all that time. And then decided to come back to Australia in 2000, which is a long time ago now. It's like nearly...
It's nearly 22 years ago.
I know.
Okay, so you came back, and where did you go to live then?
So I was in Brisbane, and I was lecturing in architecture at UQ. And, and then I sort of around that time was when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so it just became... It was very... bit of a journey, really, trying to learn to... live with major mental illness. And so, I sort of left academia, went back into architectural practice, did some work in policy, and I think I really struggled for a long time to reconcile having a very stressful and high pressure sort of career with being very unwell. And so it was kind of, chook lotto how I ended up in Nobby. But I did, and I'm glad that I did. And so moving away from Brisbane was actually quite important in terms of my journey to recovery. So, and gardening was a big part of what helped ground me and heal me. And I certainly didn't think that I was going to found a social enterprise. It's sort of, I've got plenty of good ideas, often way more ideas than anyone could achieve in a lifetime. But so that's the sort of funny backstory as to how I ended up here.
Yeah, well, I want to hear about the chook lotto. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on Big Little Small Talk with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Louise Noble, who's the founder of the Mulberry Project. So, Louise, you said that you were diagnosed with bipolar. Had you had episodes of issues with your mental health before that, or how does one get diagnosed with bipolar at age,
well, I was
whatever
30s,
you were, 30?
So, Yeah, so I'm sorry, I missed the question. It was like, how did I get
Oh,
diagnosed?
had you had episodes?
It was kind of like...
Did it sort of come on?
It's kind of... I think it's funny because I kind of, became very sick to the point where I couldn't, function when I came back to Australia. So in hindsight, I was sort of going like, why was this? Was this like another transition? Do you know what I mean? Like actually, because moving back when you've been like living in another country for a long time is actually very stressful. I think it's actually really difficult. People don't really... I think you can underestimate how challenging that can be when you've built a life in another country and in another language, and then to move back to the country that you came from, because the country that you arrive back into is not the same country that you left when you leave, when you've been away for a really extended period of time. So it was like, was it that transition, or was it that I was in a place of safety? It was probably, I mean, obviously stress contributes, but it was like, I think probably being in a place of safety, I didn't have the latitude to be unwell when I was, kind of on my own in, a different country sort of thing, so to speak. But when I did have my diagnosis and I spoke to some of my friends from university, and they just laughed and they just said, oh my God, Lou, it's like, we're not surprised,
Oh.
Yeah. So I suppose it's like kind of, there's a lot of good things about bipolar disorder.
Yeah, so tell me about that. I think I've heard you speak one time, and it is the mania, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I suppose there's a lot of energy that comes from mania. Well, mania is like when it gets a bit out of hand, but like hypermania, so when you have a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, you can kind of see things and imagine things that maybe other people can't see, or you're living in the realm of possibility. That's the really beautiful, and it's kind of one of those things you've got to learn how to keep it in check a bit, but a lot. But there's a lot of beauty in mania as well, and I think sometimes mental illness and conditions like bipolar or others can be pathologized to the point where you don't see that they're actually really powerful, because you have different ways of thinking. So yeah, and actually Kay Redfield-Jamison, who's an American academic and psychiatrist, she herself has bipolar disorder and wrote beautifully had done a little research on bipolar, basically saying exactly that thing, that we shouldn't be pathologizing this. It's actually, there's a lot of creative thinkers, in the history of literature, music, science, who actually had a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also chaos. So I suppose it's kind of like, part of it's good, that sort of thinking big, like the characteristics of mania are, flight of ideas, they call it, like, so excessive spending,
getting a tattoo,
doing all sorts of things that you might not think are really good, not sleeping very much, like all that sort of stuff.
But at the same time, in terms of your work and your creativity, like you're really producing great things.
You can, until you get to the point where the wheels fall off, and then everything, and then you just fall. Well, it's a spectrum disorder, so people have different things, but then you fall to a point where the depression is very real, and suicidality, because it's so painful, because you're kind of living with a tormentor in a way, where your brain, you're kind of eating yourself. So you go from this point where you just feel powerful, everything's colourful, everything is the realm of possibility, to the world of I've completely destroyed everything, I am so useless, I'm so pathetic, I'm this, I'm that, and it is like an incessant sort of it is a torment. It is like the tormentors in Harry Potter, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's the staying alive is one of the biggest things in bipolar disorder. It has a very high suicide rate.
So how quickly for you would you go from a state of high to a state of low? And do you know what the triggers are?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's taken me a long time to learn how to manage my condition. Probably took the best part of 15 years to kind of get a handle on it. And there's a lot of things that you need to do to be able to manage that effectively. Like I said, it's a spectrum condition. Some people have what they call rapid cycling, so they can be like manic and suicidal in the same day. My profile is more like 3 to 6 months of mania and then a similar amount of depression. But I try not to get to that point. And, you know, obviously I have a treating psychiatrist and, you know, medicated, I have a psychologist, you know, all those things. I've got a lot of people supporting me behind the scenes so that I don't get to that point. So a lot of that is actually, as you said, like just feeling when, okay, these are the patterns, this is when you know, like you're getting too wound up or whatever like that. So for me, I'm mainly manic, which is good but dangerous. And so a lot of it is like learning how to, like, just having discipline with regards to like overstimulation, ensuring that you get enough sleep, you know, like
Do enough gardening.
Well, gardening is the thing that really, because it brings you back into the present, and it's one of the things that I really enjoy about gardening. Say if I compare it to, you know, my previous work as an architect, like when you're an architect, it's a lot in your head. You're visioning, like but you also, there's a lot involved in actually making things happen, and there's very long time frames, and also when, you know, I have extraordinarily high levels of anxiety, so that can kind of, you know, it's not always a great profession for me to be in for that reason. Whereas gardening, because it's physical, it brings me back into my body, and it brings me back into the present. And so, and it's also that you can see what you've done.
Yeah,
so
the evidence is there. You can see it growing in front of you.
You can see it growing, and it's like
cut the flowers and put them in a vase.
That's right.
And you can smell them.
Even if it's like sometimes it gets a bit, I suppose, overwhelming when it's lovely having all the rain and all the rest of it, but like kikuyu is the bane of my life. So I'm still trying to wrestle it, you know, away from, you know, my garden beds and stuff like that. But it's still good. It's like you can just be outside for a few hours, and you can, and even if you don't do a lot, like you can just be in the garden. You always see things.
Have the sunlight on your face.
Yeah.
Now, because you're a bit of a slouch, you've decided, okay, well, I'm going to go and do a PhD in what do we do?
Creative writing.
Okay. And how where are you up to with that?
Oh, well, it's kind of on hold. You know, it's like I would really love to complete it, and I definitely think I've got a couple of books in me, but it's just like, it's kind of, I've created this monster. It's a good monster, but I'm trying to hand it on. Like I'm trying to build it so that I can hand it on.
Oh, and this is the Mulberry Project.
The Mulberry Project, yeah, and so that I can bring back more of my time to do things like, you know, finish my PhD and, you know.
You had an interesting job at one time. You were working at the Clifton Waste Facility. What did you call that job? What did you say about the people that came through?
it's the drive-by confessional.
So explain that to me.
Well, I think that I absolutely loved that job. Like, it was a really great job. I absolutely loved it because, you know, sometimes I suppose the social aspect of some of these small customer service jobs, which essentially, you know, a gate operator at the tip is, actually perform a really important social function in smaller communities. For a lot of people who live on rural properties, coming to town a couple of days a week and bringing the rubbish in is sometimes the only social interaction that they have. And so I had lots of really great conversations with customers when I was working at Clifton Tip, and all my mates had come up to the gatehouse and turn the car off and sort of have a chat for 20 minutes until the next customer came
in for a chat. Oh, that's great. You're a counselling service right there at the recycle store.
It's amazing what you hear.
I'm sure. I look, Louise, I don't doubt that. I think that's a very, very valid point. It's just that one interaction and the difference that you could have made to people's lives. Unfortunately, my time is running out, but I think I often ask this question of people, and I think you're a perfect person to ask it. If you could only store one type of food in your pocket, what would you carry?
Pumpkin seeds, because you can eat them and they're easy to grow.
So you can eat them raw and you can grow them. Very clever. What about if you were a farm animal? What would you be and why?
I'd probably be a cattle dog, because I'm running around rounding people up and chasing things, but I'm looking forward to getting old and just lying in the sun
and snoring like your dog.
Yeah, like
dogs
my
have
dog.
They're here today. What about the weirdest food combination you've ever tried? And this would be big for you.
This is a funny one, the weirdest combination. I was thinking this morning, and I've probably got something weirder that I could think of. But so I was in India with a friend of mine, floating down the Kerala backwaters on a rice barge, and anyway, it was like the driver was also the cook, and anyway, he served up to us this one afternoon fruit and vegetable fritters.
Fruit and vegetable fritters.
So it had, and it was just in India, and it was just like really. It was kind of funny. It was so it had beetroot and pineapple and all sorts of things in these little fritters, but they were actually really delicious and quite delightful. And it was fruit and vegetable fritters, and it's like kind of brought me back to my grandmother. One of her favourite things was, sort of pineapple and cheese on toast. Grilled. Pineapple.
Way before the pizza, you think?
I know. So it's kind of funny. It was just, so there's a funny one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You probably were the same. Did you ever have corned meat fritters? That was
yum.
The leftovers.
Delicious.
Oh no, I can't pay money for fritters in a restaurant. Yeah, I think no. That's leftover food is the fritters, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What about a bit more serious one? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Well, finishing a book or my PhD, and that the Mulberry Project is kind of happening, and I can be I don't know, just the creative person, creative consultant. What do you call that when it's you're the ideas person?
The creative director or something
creative
like
director.
that. Yeah,
That's what
another title.
Creative director. I'm not actually. Titles don't bother me, but I'd like to, be able to sort of step back a bit and then have a different role plays to my strengths. So yeah,
exactly. Now, are you a royalist? Do you know anything about you? Probably. If I was to ask you, who's your most favourite royal person, you might tell me someone from the Russian time or something. I'll just ask it. Who's your favourite royal? Louise?
Yeah. I'm not a big. I'm not a royalist or anything, but. I suppose it was another really interesting question, Megan. Actually, I had to think a little about it, but I thought Josephine Bonaparte, Napoleon's sort of ex-wife, but because she was a great lover of roses, she commissioned Redoute, who was an amazing French painter, to paint all of the roses in her garden, and she had a collection of 250 roses. So I've got about probably nearly 50 roses. So, I've got some work to do to catch up to Josephine.
Oh, look, I think that's probably the most intellectual answer we've ever had. That's beautiful. I love that story. And my last question, probably my favourite, if I was to put this song on the jukebox, what's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Oh, well, I'm like very much of my time, I suppose, but George Michael's Outside is a great one. You know, I love that song.
Whenever you hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, George Michael's Outside.
Outside, come on, let's get outside.
Well, perfect for you.
Yeah.
Louise, you've been such a joy to interview today. It's been lovely to have you on Big Little Small Talk. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much, Megan.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.